Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. This is the 2023 Audi S6, and yes, it's still on sale. The Mercedes-AMG E-Class and the BMW 5 Series and Audi's own S7 seem to get all the coverage, but the S6 is still here, and it's surprisingly sporty with a 444 horsepower twin-turbo V6. Today, I'm going to review the S6 and show you all of its quirks and features. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the Audi S6, and I'm going to start with a little overview of this car and where it stacks up in Audi's lineup and against the competition, at least on paper. We'll get to the driving experience in a little bit. So, this is the high-performance version of the Audi A6, and yes, that is still on sale too. I feel like that car has largely been forgotten, but it's still around, and so is the performance model. Now, the last generation S6 had a twin-turbo V8 with 450 horsepower. This car has a twin-turbo 2.9-liter V6 with 444 horsepower. So Audi went down in engine size, cylinders, and power when they redesigned the S6 a few years ago. That's not too shocking. More and more cars are getting smaller engines, but it was a bit of a surprise that they went down in power. Nonetheless, this car is still fast. Audi says 0 to 60 in the low 4-second range, and of course, it still has standard all-wheel drive for strong launches. Now, the 2023 S6 starts around $75,000, and even at that somewhat high price point, value is one of its big selling points compared to rivals. One close rival is the Mercedes-AMG E53. It has about 430 horsepower to this car's 444. That starts around $83,000. Then you have the BMW M550i, which has an impressive 525 horsepower, a lot more than the S6, but it starts around $82,000, again, more expensive than this car. Now, it's also worth pointing out that Audi's own S7 is a rival to the S6. It has the same powertrain, the same mechanicals, basically everything the same, but a sloping roofline and a hatchback, and people seem to think it's cooler. It starts around $10,000 more expensive than this S6, again, in the mid $80,000 range. Now, if you like this car, but you want more power, Audi doesn't really offer it. This is the most powerful sedan version of this car. You could step up to the RS6, but it's only offered as a wagon, 600 horsepower and about $130,000 starting price. There's also the RS7 with similar specs, but hatchback only. If you want a sedan, the S6 is the top of the line. But anyway, next on to the quirks and features, starting with the exterior styling, which is particularly quirky because it's so subtle and restrained. You look around this car and there's not a lot of giveaways that this is a high-performance twin-turbo 444 horsepower monster sedan. You don't really get that from this exterior design. Now, that's a benefit to some people and a drawback to others. Frankly, I like it. I like that around this car you don't have logos and scoops and intakes and vents and needless carbon fiber trim. I like that it's subtle and understated, but a lot of people are going to want a little bit more flair if they spend this much money on a performance sedan. Still, it's interesting. Now, the biggest exception to this car's understated looks, definitely the wheels, which are very large, and they have a distinctive, kind of flashy design with these ridges in the spokes. They look cool, don't get me wrong, but a little flashier than the rest of the car, and they even say RS on them. Even though this is an S model, not an RS model in Audi's performance lineup, it's got RS wheels. Now, one exterior touch I don't like in this car comes in the grille, where you have these two very obvious radar sensors that take up a lot of space and kind of ruin the look of the grille of this car. Just not particularly attractive. They're weird and way too bulky. Frankly, the whole thing makes you want to kind of not get adaptive cruise control, but of course you wouldn't do that. Still, not a particularly attractive design choice. Most automakers hide their sensors in the the brand logo in front. And speaking of front, when you walk up to the car and unlock it, the headlights do this cool dance, as you can see. They have this like welcome sequence to make you feel special from your Audi. I also like the fact that when the running lights are on, they sort of cut through the orange side reflector. It's a neat look that nobody else is really doing, and it feels very modern and cutting edge and cool. Audi remains the coolest brand when it comes to exterior lighting, and that's further proven when you turn on the turn signal. You can see in back the signal sweeps across the rear of the car. It looks great, a lot better than a simple, boring, blinking turn signal. This sweeping one that draws your attention and makes you think, that's pretty cool. Also worth pointing out, by the way, in the back of this S6, you have quad exhaust, which is probably the only real giveaway that this is the high performance model. Quad exhaust still signify big power, and that's true here. And next up, we move inside the S6, where the interior looks a lot like the interior of basically every modern Audi. But that's a good thing, because Audi interior is a nice place to be, as you can see. You got a lot of high quality materials in here, nice stuff to touch, to look at, high gloss, aluminum, good surfaces, Alcantara. Everything looks nice in this interior. And frankly, it's a good place to spend time if you're sitting up front. That's also true of the seats themselves, which have this nice red contrast stitching diamond pattern. They look cool and contribute to a high quality atmosphere inside this car. Now, one drawback of this interior, however, is that Audi has almost entirely given up on buttons and switches. Now, unlike most car reviewers, you can take kind of an old school attitude here, bring back my buttons. I actually prefer touchscreens for most car controls, but Audi has gone pretty far with this, and even the climate controls have been fully integrated into a screen. You don't really have any climate controls outside this screen you see here, this lower screen in the center control stack. Now, with that said, one benefit of this lower screen is that the climate controls are pretty much always there and always in this spot, and that includes temperature, heated seat, fan speed. They're all right here pretty much all of the time. That means you don't have to go into some menu to pull up your climate controls. They're right here just like buttons would be, and you can tap the same spot to turn on the heated seats each time without going into some screen menu. Still, it's on a screen rather than a physical button, which makes operation just a little bit harder. Now, it's also worth pointing out, I mentioned the climate controls are almost always on that lower screen, but not always. Sometimes that screen has other functions, but it's usually when you have selected it to. For example, if you're entering a navigation destination, you can see that lower screen becomes a pad where you can write a destination out, and that takes over the climate controls, but of course, it's only temporary until you finished writing your destination. Usually, the climate controls are right there. But anyway, moving up one screen here in the center control stack to the central infotainment system, I have to say this system is fantastic. It's tremendously intuitive, very easy to use, responds very quickly to your touch. As you can see, you scroll through stuff, it all makes a lot of sense. I also love the home screen, which is great. 3 panels that show you exactly what you want to see. And for the navigation system in this infotainment screen, I love the 3D map you can turn on, which to me just makes navigating better and also more fun. My only real complaint about this infotainment screen, I wish it was bigger. You can kind of see this car is showing its age a little bit because brand new cars coming out have really tightened up the central climate vents or moved them to the side in order to allow for a larger screen. Here, the center vents are still pretty big and the screen is relatively small. Of course, a larger screen would give you, well, more screen space for your stuff, your map, your apps. It makes it safer and gives you more space to touch and just makes it easier to use. I'm sure that future Audi models will start to go that direction like so many other brands. Now, I mentioned that Audi has mostly ditched buttons and switches, but one fantastic one they've kept is a volume knob. You can see it here over on the passenger side because the driver has their own on the steering wheel. This volume knob, you can twist it, of course. There's no screen to change the volume, which is great. And this is also a next track button, so you can push it left or right and it changes the track without you having to go into some screen in the infotainment to change the track, which is a drawback of my new Mercedes E-Class. You can change the track easily on the steering wheel, but if you want to do it from the passenger seat, you're in the screens. Here you got a physical button, which is a great idea. I'm glad they kept that physical button. And the final screen worth discussing in here is the gauge cluster screen, which also is fantastic. I love how you can change the views and see basically whatever you want. You want a big map? You got it. You want a big big radio display for some reason, you got it. Or you can make it small but still keep it there. It is immensely configurable. This is one of my very favorite gauge clusters in the whole car industry. I still prefer the gauge screen layout in Mercedes-Benz models. It's a little bit larger and you have a little bit more configuration options, but the Audi, it's easier to adjust. Just simple buttons on the steering wheel, very easy to change, and frankly, it shows all the right stuff. This gauge screen should be a model for how other automakers could do it better. Most are not this good. And by the way, speaking of steering, as I mentioned the steering wheel, this car has adaptive cruise control, as you might expect. It'll speed up and slow down based on the speed of the car in front of it, but it does not have any form of automatic steering. It will not steer for you in your lane. It won't do automatic lane changes. To me, that's unacceptable at this price point. I'm not sure the exact sticker price of this car, but probably in the high $70,000, low to mid $80,000 range. And in this day and age, you really gotta have auto steering in the $80,000 price point range. There's cars that are a lot less expensive than this one that have it, and the S6 is kind of the top of the A6 lineup. That's a feature it really needs to have. Pretty disappointing that it doesn't. Now, beyond all the screens, only a few other interesting quirks in here. One is this panel to the left of the steering wheel. You pull on it and it reveals a hidden storage compartment, which is actually kind of cool. The driver can keep like a key card for a parking garage in there, or a toll ticket or whatever. A little extra storage over on the driver's side. I also like the fact that in the center console of this car, this button here pulls up the cameras, which is great. You push a button and the cameras are up. That can be helpful if you're parking, but you haven't gone into reverse so the cameras automatically pop up. Well, you got a button you can press to pull them up if you're trying to fit into a tight spot, and I like easy access to the camera system. Also worth pointing out, there is a wireless cell phone charger in this car. It's located in the center console. Lift it up and you can see the wireless charger in there and a couple of USB-C ports for additional charging or plugging in your devices to the infotainment system. And next we move on to the back seat in the S6, which is surprisingly large. I have the front seat positioned where I would sit, a 6'4" tall adult, and I still have knee room back here. Not a ton, but a decent amount. And I have a lot of headroom, which is especially impressive. I'm used to headroom in SUVs, but most cars these days have a sloping roof line to try to convince people they're not a boring old sedan. Not this one. It is a boring old sedan, but the benefit is you got good headspace back here, which is great. Decent backseat room, unless you're the middle passenger, because this hump in the center of the floor is going to be really difficult for your feet. You'll have to stick them on each side. It will not be particularly comfortable. But if you don't have a middle passenger, that's a good thing because it gives you access to all the goodies. You drop down this central armrest and then you have, well, an armrest, but at the front you also have cup holders, as you can see, and in the back, a little storage compartment. Wouldn't you rather have an armrest, cup holders, and a storage compartment than a third person in your back seat? I think yes. Also worth pointing out back here, rear seat climate controls. Both sides have their own zone in this car, so they can adjust the temperature, the fan speed, and dual heated rear seats, which is pretty nice to see. It enhances the comfort and livability in the back seat even more. And below that, you got charge ports, 2 USB-Cs and a cigarette lighter style charge port, which again only adds to the appeal. And even more exciting back here, you got built-in rear sunshades. You can pull on this tab, lift them up, clip them into place, and then you are shielded from the sun. Or more likely, if you have a small child, an infant, they will be shielded from the sun, which is actually useful. But a lot of good stuff back here. I think this is a genuinely nice back seat. Wasn't really expecting so many amenities and so much space. And then there's the cargo area, or the trunk, which is largely uninteresting from a quirks perspective, although as a feature, it is quite large, larger than you'd expect in a mid-size sedan like this. Pretty huge trunk. And one interesting thing, you lift up the trunk floor and you can see there is a spare tire in this car. A little temporary spare, but still better than a can of Fix-A-Flat, which is what you normally get now since wheels and tires are getting so big. This car has an actual spare. Also worth pointing out, that latch you use to lift up the trunk floor also serves as a clip to keep it in place on the top of the trunk opening. That way, if you have a flat tire and you're fumbling around on the roadside trying to Parrot. You don't have to worry about this annoying trunk floor continuing to close because it's latched in place, which is a great piece of design. Other than that, nothing particularly interesting or unusual back here, except that this, being the S6, has a trunk, and like I mentioned earlier, the S7 is the same basic car except it has a hatchback. So if you like this car but you want more space, folding rear seats, a larger cargo area, the S7 is the one to go for. The S6 has the regular sedan body style. All right, driving the S6. Ah. This car is actually pretty good. It's just that this segment is dying or dead, and that's just the truth. You know, it's not dead, but Audi was never a huge player in this segment, and now that the segment is shrinking, Audi is even less of a huge player. You know, the Mercedes E-Class, the BMW 5 Series, those are kind of the mainstays of this segment. And even those cars are radically losing sales as buyers switch to SUVs. Now, Audi has masterfully made that shift to SUVs. The Q5, the Q7, very popular. Q3 and Q8 are also, in their segments, very popular. Sedans, not as much. And still, Audi keeps this car going, as I have reminded you. You may have forgotten. So let me give you my thoughts on this car. I loved the outgoing A6's powertrain. That twin turbo V8 was great, and they're still using it in a lot of cars. Is great. They downgraded the S6 from this generation to this 2.9 V6, which I have never liked as much, mainly because I just feel like there's a lack of responsiveness in the mid-range. I mean, that's a reality of V6s compared to V8s generally, but I feel like this one is especially bad. Some automakers have done a good job of making their turbo 6-cylinders kind of mimic the feel of a V8 in terms of that mid-level responsiveness and torque, and actually, I think my Mercedes E450 does do a good job of that. It's a turbo 6-cylinder instead of the V8 that would have been in that car in years past, and it's pretty responsive. This car though, you drop your foot and there's a lag when you do it, and then there's a lag to downshift, and even then it's kind of working harder than just a torquey V8 or some rival 6-cylinders. Now, I want to make it clear, that's not necessarily a huge drawback, especially because I suspect the people who are buying this car aren't obsessed with getting the most performance out of every iota, etc., etc. They want a fast car that's fun. This is that. It's like a fast, nice sedan. And if that's what you're looking for, that's what this is. What this isn't is like a really great performance car. You know, this is the same powertrain in the RS5, and I had similar complaints in that car. It's just floor it, and then you wait a minute, and then it gets there, but it's so peaky. It's just not quite what I'm looking for. But if I just wanted a sort of fast car to drive around, a pretty fast car, actually 0 to 60 in 4.2 probably, this is that. It's just, in my mind, the old S6 was that a little bit better. Now, it's worth pointing out that while I say this car is still a fast alternative, just not the very top of the line. You know, Mercedes and BMW both have compelling cars. I'm especially impressed with the M550i, delivering that much power at this price point. This car is cheaper, but only by about 8 grand, 10%. And for another, that car has 80 more horsepower. That seems like a trade-off I would be making. If you're one of the few people still clinging to a sedan, why not cling to the really good one? And frankly, the E53 is great too. The tech in that car is a little better than this. I think ultimately the reason people buy the S6 is it's a little cheaper than those cars, and yet it's still fun. It still gives you like an enjoyable, fun driving experience, and it certainly does that. I don't think this engine is as good as the outgoing one, fine, but it's still fast and fun and exciting and cool. And this car is also dynamically pretty good. It goes around corners reasonably well, especially when you consider its size. The steering isn't the sharpest or the most communicative, but it's like you'd expect in like a mid-size sedan. However, the handling is pretty excellent. Audi does a good job of delivering both a pretty comfortable ride and a relatively sharp handling car, which is always kind of a fine line to walk. Ultimately, my thing about this car is it's good. Like, it's reasonably fast and fun, the tech is good, all that, but it's not like a standout in any particular way. It's pretty quick. I think BMW does speed and performance better. This is a good car. It is. It's fun, it's quick, it handles reasonably well, the tech is good, there's a lot of nice stuff, but I think most people end up gravitating towards a rival or towards an SUV, and with good reason. This car is not like a major bombshell standout. It's good, but not like, whoa, amazing. And so that's the 2023 Audi S6. This is a nice performance sedan, but most people seem to prefer the S7. Even though it's more expensive, it's cooler. Still, the S6 is here in case you want a sporty sedan that's surprisingly subtle and under the radar. Anyway, now it's time to give the S6 a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 62 out of 100, which places the S6 here against some similar cars. It's near the bottom, but really that's because most of these cars are higher performers, like the Audi RS7, the BMW M5 CS, and the Audi RS5 Sportback. The S6 has a lot of nice benefits, but it's also a bit of a dinosaur, a big sedan in the age of SUVs and crossovers. It's a fine car for the small group of people into this sort of thing, but I personally would rather have an RS5 Sportback for more performance or an SUV for more practicality, rather than the weird in-between of the S6.